Good morning, everyone. David DeHaas of the Whole Body Detox Show, sitting down here at Living Waters Wellness Center today. And today I'm bringing on a couple of guests because today's show, in my opinion, is about a situation that is greater than COVID. I know you can say, David, how could that be? But the reality is there's a pollution that is coming into our valley that has significant health ramifications. And so we're going to talk about that today, and we're going to talk about actually what our local lawmakers need to be doing. So we're going to break this down to a fifth grade level, as I always try to do. So today on the show, I've got Hank Allen, who is a resident and a realtor here in Eagle, Idaho. And I've also got Miss Cathy Cooke. Cathy Cooke is a building biologist. She has all the meters to come into your home and read to see what's happening with your Wi-Fi, what's happening with the signals, and the newest signal that's being brought to the valley is a signal called 5G. So guys, welcome to the show.
Hello, Dave. Thanks for having us.
Yep. Hi, Dave. Glad to be here.
All right. So we're going to talk about, first of all, there's been some significant events recently that's even brought this to more concern. I shouldn't say concern, just the fact that's happened. And Hank, let's do your story. So let's go quickly to your story. What happened to you in April?
Wow. So April, I was outside my backyard and started feeling some flutters in my chest, and came in the house, laid down a little bit, tried to take care of myself, and it got worse and worse. So finally I had my wife drive me to the ER, and I went into the ER and they put a cuff on my arm and they rushed me in the back room and said, "You are an AFib." And it felt like my heart was going to jump out of my chest, or like you have like a 4-cylinder motor and you pull a spark plug on it. First time in my life I ever felt that way. And it's happened 5 times since. I've never had a problem with my heart.
You've been in the hospital 5 times since April 15th.
5 times I've been into the ER in AFib.
Holy
Yep.
moly.
And the first time they had to cardiovert me, and that's where they take 2 electrical pads and they put them on your chest and knock you out and then shock your heart back into a normal sinus rhythm.
Oh my goodness. Now, what caused this, Hank?
Well, when I asked the ER doctor, they say, "Oh, it just happens." What I know is they recently turned on a cell tower within 650 yards from my backyard. And I have a strong opinion that the cell tower did this to me.
And what we come to believe that there's 2 types of cell phone towers. Let's talk about that, because as we get into that,
Sure.
we're going to talk about there's 2 types of actually communications devices that are putting on these towers. One is for cell phones, and one is for broadband data. In other words, a way for you to get your Netflix, your Amazon, your emails, and all that stuff. So your internet access, if you will. But Hank, there's that tower went in with some controversy a little over a year ago. I know there was a lawsuit regarding that, and what we've become to understand since is that legislators, county commissioners, councilmen, mayors just don't understand the ability they have to properly regulate this. So on this particular tower, Hank, that went in, I know there's some controversy. You guys eventually, the judge found for the tower builder, but in looking at it, we know that could have been changed if there had been some diligent planning done in the first place, correct?
That is correct. Hey, but real quick, before we jump into the county, could I show you another picture here?
I want to go into this because, guys, this doesn't just affect you and I out there and our kids. There is something very important for us to stay here on Earth, and that is bees. And Hank grows bees. What happened to you, Hank?
So I live on a small farm, and I have a beehive to pollinate my my trees, and then also we eat the honey at the end of summer. We collect the honey. So right here I have a video I took. This was within 2 weeks of the tower being turned on. My bees, I checked on them a little bit earlier. They made it through winter. Tower goes on. My entire hive dies. And so right here, I'm showing a picture of the bottom board.
A month ago.
And it's probably about 1.5 inches deep there in bees. And the entire colony collapsed within 2 weeks.
And those were alive in March.
Yes, that's correct.
You see, we have
Wow.
all the honeycomb.
And guys, this is actually what, creates our food out of these bees. And we've already got, of course, most people are aware that bees are already having quite a problem from pesticides and other things. But now we're adding another force that they can't contend with. And that is this highly radiated power from these 5G antennas. And that's what we're here to talk about today. What else, what other causes did you notice on your place?
Well, so for myself, if I am out in my backyard or in a direct line between like two cell towers, the new cell tower that was installed and an existing cell tower, and when those suckers are talking to each other, it seems like it's the most of the energy is happening between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And if I'm in between those two towers, it zaps me. So I noticed out of all the 5 times I went AFib, it all happened between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Is any of this happening to your neighbors?
Well, it's interesting. So I asked around to some of my neighbors on next door and see if anybody else here in Eagle in the last 2 months has had heart issues or gone into AFib. And I received a reply back from a lot of people. And there was 20 people that all confirmed that within the last couple of months, they've had abnormal heart conditions, either feeling heart flutters, like they're dropping heartbeats, or they actually have gone into AFib out of the blue.
Wow, that's huge. Cathy,
Yeah.
I know you have the meters to go out and look at people's homes, just Wi-Fi and measure some of these things. What have you found with people that call you? Why do people call you to come have their home looked at?
Well, there's various reasons. A lot of people are just trying to be proactive and protect their families. But very often people will call me and say, I don't know what's going on, but ever since I got X, a new Wi-Fi router, or my new iPhone 12, or this cell tower went up across the street, or this 5G antenna was put up, in front of my house, I've been experiencing migraines and insomnia and tinnitus, and my kids' behavior is out of control, or a whole list of symptoms. So they're trying to figure out if it is their radio frequency exposure from a lot of this stuff, and if that's what's causing some of their health problems.
Wow. Okay, so we've got this stuff coming into the valley here, and I know we've talked to some of the council people, we've talked to some of the commissioners, and it appears to me, Hank, that most of these legislators and county commissioners and councilmen are just completely confused about that. Let's talk about what gives the local jurisdictions, the local governments, the right to properly regulate this, and what can they regulate and what can they not regulate. Let's talk about that. Let's break it down into a 5th grade level so that even a 5th grader can understand this.
Okay. Well, so it goes back to the 1996 Telecommunications Act that was signed in by Bill Clinton. Okay. And this, remember back in 96, I don't know if you guys are old enough, but they were trying to get basic telecommunication services to make a phone call on your cell phone spread out across the nation. And they didn't want cities and towns picking one carrier over the other, or they wanted to be free, what do you call it? Help me out with the word here. Free trade. And they didn't want people picking one carrier over the other, right?
Right.
So they wrote this act, but they realized that local governments still needed power to control where these towers went, the placement, the construction, and modifications to these units. So the first section of the Telecommunications Act, this is 47 USC 32A7, states this: general authority, except as provided in this paragraph, nothing in this act shall limit or affect the authority of the state or local government, right? So this is important. Local government is the only authority to regulate these towers. It comes down to our commissioners, our mayors, and city council is exactly what lays out here. And most people don't realize that, and they want to pass the buck and push it to a senator or someone else. But it's local government that can control this, right? Now, again, no one shall limit or affect the authority of local government over decisions regarding placement, construction, and modification of a personal wireless facility. So that means our local cities have the ability to do it, but there's 5 things that they have to abide by in order to not get a lawsuit and have a problem or a violation with the Telecommunications Act.
Tell us what those 5 things are. Let's go into those.
All right. So the regulation of the placement, construction, and modification of a personal wireless service facility by a state or local government shall not prohibit functional equivalent services or personal wireless services. Okay. So this part right here says that basically everyone's entitled to be able to make a phone call on their cell phone, a basic phone call. And if I'm sitting out here in Eagle and my city councilman says, nope, we don't want to put a tower in Eagle, and I can't make a call, now they've violated the Telecommunications Act, and they will be mandated to put in that tower so I can get coverage because they'll be discriminating against me.
Okay, so this is basically just a cell phone call, text message, etc.
That's correct.
What else?
Call. Okay. Number 2, state and local government shall not act on a request to place, construct, or modify a personal wireless service facility within a reasonable period of time. So that just means that if a carrier wants to put a pole in or put a tower in, the city or town needs to get back to them pretty quick, usually within about 30 days.
Okay.
Right. Number 3, the decision by the state or local government to deny a request to place, construct, or modify a personal wireless facility shall be done in writing and supported by substantial evidence containing in written record. Well, great. So if you want to deny one of these things or approve it, it has to be in writing. Pretty easy, right? So as long as
substantial evidence, what's that mean?
Substantial evidence? Well, why are you denying it? Well, let's say there's already coverage. If people could already make a phone call, then why do we need 2 towers? They're ugly, right? They're ugly, and it allows for carriers to hang other high-powered antennas on their towers that could cause harm to people, right? So that would be a simple evidence is, we don't need it.
Right.
Okay.
You have 1 tower, but you don't need to have 4 or 5 towers. We got
Correct. Right. So now going on to number 4, no state or local government may regulate the placement, construction, modification of a personal wireless service facility based on environmental effects of radio frequencies. You go, holy cow, environmental effects. Well, for me, when I look at environmental, I go, well, health is not environmental. Environmental just means, I don't know, changing the color of the sky from, light blue to dark blue, or seeing waves going through it. It doesn't necessarily, in my mind, mean, killing my bees or putting me in AFib, right? But I think there are court cases where environmental is translated in meaning health. So when it comes to health and making a basic phone call, they don't want you to look at health or environmental. That's number 5. So basically, you want to come in, put 1 cell tower in so that I can make a basic phone call in Eagle, and I can't say, well, I'm afraid it's going to hurt me, therefore you can't put that tower in. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Okay. And then the 5th rule is basically any person adversely affected by the final action or failure by the state or local government, or any instrumentality thereof that is inconsistent with this subparagraph may within 30 days after such action or failure commence action in court of the competent jurisdiction. So that basically means that if like say a carrier is denied a tower, they have 30 days to act to bring up a suit against the city or state. Make sense?
Pretty simple.
5 things.
5 things. Other than that, they can regulate the heck out of it. If they want to deny anything else, they can.
Correct.
So when it comes to these 5G towers, that's a different title in the code.
All right, great point here, Dave. So now let's go to a big problem. So now let's fast forward from 1996, when this Telecommunication Act was first established. And remember, back in 96, I mean, our cell phones were like bricks, right? Very, very simple. We thought it was just cool to be able to call somebody while walking, or driving in our car. So now we go down and technology gets a lot bigger and a lot better, and we get smartphones, and people are now wanting to stream movies, send large files on their email, or surf the internet, right? On their cell phones. We have smartphones. So we came down to an issue, and the FCC didn't want to be controlled on that wireless, we call that broadband, right? When we're talking about streaming Netflix or streaming a movie on your cell phone, that's big data, takes a big pipe, lots of bandwidth to give those services, right? So you probably recall hearing in the news back in 19, and they were talking about net neutrality within the internet.
Yeah, what did that mean?
And there was a big lawsuit between Mozilla and the FCC. And honestly, when we get really into it, I didn't know the entire part of the lawsuit, but I do know what came out of it. Basically, what came out of it is there was a judge, Judge Millett, who ruled in this case, and it was Mozilla versus the FCC, and this was in 2019, right? And I'm going to quote what the judge's ruling was. The 1996 Telecommunications Act creates 2 potential classifications for broadband internet. One is telecommunications services, and that's under Title II. And then there is information services, which is under Title I. And let me explain the difference between Title II and Title I. So Title II is telecommunication services, which is basically being able to pick up your phone and make a call. So like we were used to back in the old days, you had a flip phone, you open it up and make a call. That's all our phone did, is just make a call, right? That is telecommunication services Title II. Now, anything past that, when we got these smartphones, and now you wanted to send emails, you want to surf the internet, you wanted to do even texting, that became information services under Title I, which is now I refer to as broadband wireless internet, right? 2 completely separate things, right? And this was established in the lawsuit, right? Now, you with me?
I'm with you.
Now, those are really important to remember, so I'm going to keep referring back to those. Information services, or Title I, or broadband, wireless broadband, telecommunication services, which is Title II, which is just making a basic phone call, right?
Right.
Now, here's the catch. So remember, we just looked at all these things up here with the Telecommunications Act of 1996 and these 5 rules you have to apply.
Right.
Those only apply to Title II telecommunication services.
Cell phone coverage, just basic making a phone call.
Making a call.
That's it.
That's it, period.
Can't regulate that, but I can regulate, as a councilman, I can regulate the heck out of Title I.
That's correct.
Can I regulate it completely out of my city?
Well, no, well, so what it's saying, it's unregulated by the FCC and the Telecommunications Act, which means if our local city doesn't regulate it, then it's completely unregulated. There's nobody regulating it, period. Nobody.
In other words, this would be like, Hank, this would be like me coming into town and I want to build a building. And I decide to build this building. I show you a great picture to the city council. I say, here's my building picture, but I don't give any specifications. I don't tell you how big the building is going to be. I just show you a big picture of it. I don't tell you how much the specification of the steel in it, the concrete, the power, et cetera, right? Completely unregulated. I can, and if I want to later put in, I tell you it's going to be for residential, but later if I want to put in a porn shop, a vape shop, anything I want to,
Oh,
I
you
can
can
do.
sell crack cocaine out of there.
I can
Meth
do.
lab,
So
whatever you
basically,
want to do. Yeah.
if I get like the towers we looked the other night out there, I get, as a real estate investor, I get my tower, my piece of real estate, which is really what it is. And now I'm going to go look for a tenant. I'm not regulated to allow the Title II on there, the cell phone coverage, but
Mhm.
Title I, I should be regulated as a tower provider.
Absolutely,
But
100%.
these city governments have completely missed that. They somehow don't understand that.
Well, and to their defense, as from 1996 moving forward, and as these large towers would come into town, and they tried to regulate them, they kept getting into lawsuits, and they get their hands slapped, and the carrier would come back and put the tower in anyways because they weren't following those 5 rules of the Telecommunications Act, right? So they were either denying it based on health concerns, or they were denying it and they were taking too long, or they weren't putting it in writing, or the big one was they were basically prohibiting basic coverage. So there wasn't current cell coverage in that area. And by denying the tower, now they're saying those people in that area can't have cell coverage. Does that make sense?
Right. And so basically what the Verizon attorneys have done to the local attorneys is they've showed them a part of the code, but they haven't showed them the rest of the story.
That's correct.
So
well, you have to dig. Of course, they don't want this to be exposed. And the Mozilla case, again, was years afterwards. This was just a couple of years ago when this case was settled, right?
Got it.
So, but the biggest driver home is if our local government does not regulate Title I, right, which is broadband wireless, downloading movies onto your iPhone, watching movies, streaming really fast, web pages, all of that stuff. If they don't regulate it, there are no regulations at all, period.
Well, let's talk about the amount of power that's coming out of these antennas. Cathy, do you want to speak to that? How much power is coming out of these small, they call them small wireless telecommunication facilities, but really they're not small in power. They're very large in power. Is that right?
Yeah, that's actually correct. They're calling them small because they're smaller than, say, a macro tower. So when we think of a macro tower, we think of, we're driving down the highway and we see all these cell towers in the distance, and we can see these huge big towers with all these antennas on the top. So it's important to realize the tower is just the pole, right? It's just the pole that's up there. And then the carriers put all of their antennas on top. And so those antennas are quite powerful, and the radiation that's coming out of them can extend for many miles, 10 miles or so. I mean, you can make a phone call with your phone connected to that tower many, many miles away. So it travels quite a distance, and it has to be quite powerful in order, to extend that far, to go that much of a length or a distance. So what's important to note is that these quote unquote small cells that are being put up in many communities, and right here in Boise, I've seen many actually on people's properties, right in front of their homes, in their yard. And the antennas that are on there are the same antennas that are on these big macro towers. So the pole itself is smaller, so they're calling them small cells, but the antennas that are right on top there, they can have both 5G antennas, which are smaller, like pizza box shaped antennas. But at the top, you will almost always see this larger 4G antenna, which is the exact same antenna that's on these big macro towers, and they have the same amount of power. So imagine if you're 10 miles down the road and you're connecting to a tower and you can make a phone call. Imagine having that same antenna literally in your yard. It's extremely high power that we're putting very, very close to our homes.
And I've been getting phone calls from people that say, David, there's a tower, and all of a sudden I'm having brain fog. I'm having my son's not being able to focus. I've got tingling in my body. All these different, and what Hank experienced. So this is a real problem. as I see it, I mean, there's gonna be a lot of damage caused by this to people. So, and there's no way to shield this in your home, correct? I mean, is there anything that,
Well,
Yeah, there are a few things that you, well, okay, so there are shielding materials that you can try, but it's based, the reduction is based on a percentage. So let's say you have, you know, a tower a mile away from you and you're getting a lot of radio frequency into your home and you want to shield it, you can do that with paint or siding or mesh or various other materials, which I might say is very, very, very expensive. So it's cost prohibitive for most people. But if you can't afford it and you do choose to do that, you will reduce your exposure by a percentage, a pretty high percentage, 90, 95% in some cases, if you do it correctly, which is very important because it's difficult to do correctly. If you do it correctly and you can afford it, however, and you have an antenna in on your property, on your street, the power coming out of that antenna is so high, it's still going to reduce the percentage very effectively, but you've still got a huge percentage left over.
well, it means I'd have to block my windows, wouldn't I?
Yes, you would. And there's various
So
ways.
basically, I need to build a bomb shelter on my home if I want to effectively prevent myself from my family from being radiated.
You would essentially have a Faraday cage, which is not on in my profession. That would be the absolute last measure I would ever take, because it's not a healthy way to live. It's not healthy to live. You know, you're supposed to be outside and touching the ground and have sunlight and
air. Your
airflow.
garden, and of course your bees are going to be dead, and your
Right.
garden's not going to be able to grow because there's no bees. So
Yeah.
now we got a real problem. And that's all under Title I.
Yeah.
Correct?
And that's what I actually had to do on my house because I was getting the AFib, and like I say, I had a lot of the other symptoms that you're talking about. I walk outside, I get the headache, I feel like I'm kind of dizzy, feel weak, and then also just feel really lethargic afterwards.
Yeah. So you have to make a mad dash from your home to your car and get the hell out of your neighborhood right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So in order to kind of shield my house, I put aluminum window screen over all the windows, and then I use a special paint that was $230 a gallon to cover the inside of my walls.
But guys, this is no way to live. I mean, the average American, we can't do this.
It's horrible.
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous when the county governments and the city governments can effectively do their job and put the proper regulations in place.
Well, they just need to be educated. And then once they realize that the local government is who has control, it's right here in the Telecommunications Act, right?
47
They're
US.
the ones who can do it, as long as they abide by these 5 rules when it comes to Title II telecommunication services. Okay. So let me kind of talk about the what do you call it?
Well, let's talk about why. So let's talk about the thing that's been missing that we've seen locally, and that's a thing called a propagation study. So let's talk about what is a real, true propagation study, because we've seen some pretty shady stuff happening at the local council level.
Yeah. So you want to take this, Hank? Do you want me to address that?
Well, I'll give it a kind of first stab
Okay.
and I'll let you in at it. So here's a typical propagation study. This one was actually used on the Eagle cell tower. And the carrier comes in and says, well, hey, look, we want to put a cell tower right here. And you see this, the gray is where you can receive a cell call outside. The yellow, you can read it, you can get a call inside your car. The green means inside your house, right? And they basically need more power. So they kind of come up with this thing on a computer, and then they go, this is before we put the tower in, and now this is after we put the tower in, and therefore there's a gap in coverage, and we have to put a tower in, right?
Okay, so they did a map, but they haven't given you any.
Well, they haven't given us any real information here. Is this Title I or is this Title II? Is this, will the gray fill the basic telecommunication services? Or are they saying that they want it green so that they can let us stream Netflix on our cell phones? Not enough information here. And our building department, the planning departments, they don't have a sophisticated RF engineer to read through these propagation studies to understand what's going on. And in reality, it's kind of like the fox guarding the hen house. The fox goes out and hire somebody to give them a propagation study, and they can show whatever they want. They go, sure, we need more coverage here. This is what the propagation study that they paid for. Really, propagation study should be a drive test by a government paid official. They can go out there and remember the old commercials that Verizon had? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Right.
That's all it takes. Is somebody to go out and, hey, do we have coverage in this location? To
Right.
make a basic phone call. Right?
Right.
And
And that's done with,
so I-
effectively, that would be done with a special meter and done by a third party.
Sure.
And not a Verizon paid person, but let's say a third party that the industry would, of course, pay for that application through fees. Let's say
Sure.
it costs $4,000 and the application is going to have a $4,000 fee just for the propagation study alone.
Yep.
And then please show me your gap in coverage of making only cell phone calls. We don't care about if you can get your Netflix or not, because that's under Title I.
Correct. Absolutely.
I, as the city council, can regulate.
Yeah. And now let me say this. I'm not saying that people don't deserve to be able to download Netflix on their cell phone, but we as a community and our government, our local governments need to know that they can make that decision. We should sit down as a community and go, hey, do we want certain areas where people can have fast, downloading high speed, and people who necessarily don't want it can have a choice and say, well, no, I don't want it. So I choose to live in a different neighborhood where I'm not exposed to it with my kids. But we do have the choice within our government, our local governments, to decide where we're going to put these things. And we don't just have to leave it up to the carriers to tell us where they want to put them, where they can make the most money on us.
Well, okay. So as I understand it, they have to have these towers every 300 to 500 feet up and down the street. Wouldn't it make, isn't that, as I see it, there's a problem there in terms of protecting data. It would be much safer, in my opinion, from terrorists and others, if I could put this fiber optics in the ground, in a pipe, to the premises.
Oh,
That would
100%.
make a lot more sense to me.
Well,
Aren't we vulnerable as a community for our businesses? If I'm a terrorist, I blow up a few towers and boom, take the network down versus burying the pipe in the ground.
Oh, 100%. When you talk about cybersecurity being hardwired versus being wireless, there's so many advantages to being hardwired. You have, like you're talking about, cybersecurity, the fact that all of these antennas for 5G are made in China. So the Chinese have all the backdoor coding into the antennas. So if we ever got into, altercation with China, they can pretty much take these things over. It's pretty scary. And Donald Trump actually had a bunch of press releases on this very thing, and said we can't buy our equipment from China, but they're the only ones who make it. There's a lot that goes into this. Much better to be hardwired. But you know what? I got to kind of wrap it up. I have to take my kids to a 4-H meeting. So I got to wrap this thing up in about 2 or 3 more minutes on my end.
Okay. What other points do you want to make, Hank?
Well, so the biggest point is that our process, if a carrier wants to put in a new cell tower, cell towers in Ada County, Eagle, and other cities, it has to go to city council for a special use permit, right? And that means the council has to look at it and say, okay, because it's a large tower, we need to look at it. And this is just for putting up the metal tower, no antennas. When it goes for the special use permit, they don't get a look at, is it Title I, is it Title II? Nothing, just putting that tower up there. And for all of our history, everyone's assuming this is Title II, basic telecommunication services, and therefore local government can't regulate it, can't do anything. We just have to let them put them wherever they want. But in reality, now that all of this broadband, the Netflix downloading stuff is coming in, the carriers need to densify these cell towers and put them in really close to our neighborhoods and give us high power for Title I only, right? So our local officials are afraid to push back and say, no, we don't want to put these towers in residential neighborhoods or on our schools or in close, because they're afraid they're going to get a lawsuit. But in fact, they don't have enough information to make that decision, because the antenna permits come after the public hearing and the special use permits already issued, right? So tower's built, everything's done. Our commissioners have already looked at it. They've approved it. Now the carriers go down and go, well, I want to put on, 5 high-powered antennas for Verizon, so people can download Netflix, all Title One. AT&T comes in, they buy more space and put on 5 more, 6 more high-powered antennas because they want to be able to deliver Netflix to their people, all in our backyards, putting out a high-intensity amount of RF radiation that makes people sick that could have been regulated had we changed our building codes and educated our commissioners and city council to know which they can and cannot regulate. Does that make sense? It's a mouthful.
Well, yeah, I mean, what you're saying is that, okay, I go and build a building and I get the permit for the building. But normally in the county government or city governments, you would say, well, what use is this for? It's residential. But in this case, that's not been delineated. It's just saying that you can put whatever tenants you can get in there. You could be residential on one part of the tower, and it could be a porn shop on another part of the building, in this case, because they have not delineated the use, the exact use, and the amount of power in this case the power needs to be established, and what type of a tower, a device that it actually is. They need to properly regulate it. They need to have the specifications. They need to have the data, which they really don't have. They've been flying blind with the belief that they don't have any ability to do anything but other than throw up their hands and say, oh my God, come on in and take over our land.
Yep, and the typical response is, I'm sorry, our hands are tied. You need to take this up with your senators or someone above us. We can't do it.
And that's not true.
And they say their hands are tied, but it's not. It's right in the Telecommunications Act that they are the only ones that have authority. And if they follow those 5 rules, we're fine.
Right. So they need to go back and so the ones that have been in, they need to go back and say, hey, we need to regulate the power. Let's choose the proper amount of signal strength that protects the citizens so they're not having these effects that they're already having.
So I have to run in about 2 minutes. I'm gonna make a hard stop with you, but I want to give you an example. So we just went and put a request in for the council members in Ada County to deny an application for a cell tower extension that was going to be in Meridian, right? So they want to put a new cell tower in. We don't know what the antennas are going to be. We don't know anything about what's going to go on it. Just want to put a tower in. So I went simply to Verizon and look at their coverage map. And Verizon has plenty of coverage in that area where that new pole is going to be. They're saying it. They tell us, hey, we got coverage. You can make phone calls, plus you can do broadband, Title I and Title II. Went to another carrier, T-Mobile, looked at their coverage. They have plenty of coverage, right? You can make all kinds of calls here. Then I went to AT&T, looked at their coverage map, and see these pins? That's exactly where the tower is going to be. Plenty of coverage. You can look at their the legends down here, and it'll show you that they have plenty of coverage. So what that tells me is we can make a basic telephone call on our flip phone, if we had one, an old school phone, which is telecommunication services, and therefore a tower is not required. It's not required at all, period. No tower required, because we have already established that Title II exists. Now, they may want to put a tower in so that they can provide Title I broadband to people and say, hey, we need bigger pipes and we want more stuff, which is fine. If the city and the people and the residents all want to have, we all agree we want to have a bigger pipeline and we want to be radiated by these large antennas, well, great. But our city needs to know that they have the choice on saying, well, maybe not in this neighborhood, or maybe we're next to a school, or there's a lot of homes here and there's an apartment complex, and maybe we need to dial down the power coming out of these antennas, or simply not put it there at all because it's unsafe, because there's going to be too much power coming out. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. I'm going to let you go. Thanks for joining today, Hank.
Hey, thank you guys. I'll let you guys wrap it up.
So Cathy, this next big question is, Verizon and AT&T and Sprint are not the ones putting up the towers. They're independent contractors. Why is that? I can't hear you, Cathy. You're muted.
Yeah, she's got her mic off.
Your mic's off.
You go down to the bottom down there, Kathy. Your mic is off.
I know.
There you
I'm hitting unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yep, here you now.
Okay. Sorry, I hit that like 3 times. I don't know what happened there. Okay. So the question is, I can't see you, Dave. Can you see me?
I see you perfectly.
Huh, I don't know what happened there. Okay. So that's a great question. And that's just kind of the way the industry does it. So, and there's various reasons for why they do it that way. So it's a different company that leases the land and puts the tower and the infrastructures up. And then the companies put the antennas on the poles, so to speak. Now, there is some good reason to do that if you are one of the telecom providers, because then you have less liability for the tower, because the tower is not yours. So you may have liability on the antenna, but you do not for the entire structure. And oftentimes what we have seen is that some, what we call shell company, will come to the table, and in lieu of, let's say, Verizon, they will submit an application for an antenna or a tower. And then this shell company, if something happens, if there is a problem with the pole, with the infrastructure of the tower, if there's a problem and let's say somebody sues, or the city brings forth a lawsuit or something, the shell company, the company that's submitted the application on behalf of the telecom company, is responsible. But it's not really a big deal to them, because they basically file bankruptcy, they go out of business, and they wash their hands of it. So the liability actually never makes it to the telecom company themselves. And so it's a way around, some of the impending issues that may present themselves in the future, and that have presented themselves. And it is worth knowing that no major insurance company will insure the industry. So AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, none of them have insurance.
Well, insurance for health effects. They have insurance, but not
Right.
health
Right.
effects.
So yeah,
So that says it all in my book. You can't get insurance for health effects by any coverage anywhere in the world. You can get liability insurance, you can get for everything else, but not for the health effects. And there, my friends, I think lies in the biggest answer, is that's why they're shielding themselves, because they know there is a problem with this. And if we've seen in previous interviews I've had with the head of the Environmental Health Trust, and what we're seeing is happening in, we've seen, kids with cancer, brain cancer. We know there's over 16,000 plus studies into this area. So that is why they do it, that we know, and some companies have banned these 5G towers. Isn't that correct, Kathy?
yes. So there's many communities in the US that have put setbacks in place, which I think is excellent. They've, for example, said, there's no small cell can be within 1,500 feet of a residential area, which is excellent. And there are some communities that are outright saying, we're not going to put these in if you cannot conclusively prove that there are no health problems with them. I think New Hampshire was one of the big states that did that. Hawaii County did that, in other countries like Belgium. So there's a lot of activism, and there's a lot of people that are waking up and saying, hey, you can't just roll in here and do whatever you want. We need to have some local control here. And so there's pushback. And I, as long as the local lawmakers are willing to get on board with that, it can be done.
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes to the education process. They need to understand, the local council people and mayors and county commissioners over need to understand that the power is in their hands to regulate Title I to the nth degree that they want to. And that includes the power, the placement, keep it out of neighborhoods. And really, do you need to be able to watch Netflix driving home? Well, that's dangerous.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that a lot of the critiques of our stance, the critics will say, well, we have to have it for emergency medical responders. We have to have it for healthcare. This is the cutting edge. We need it for you name it. And I think that's a very disingenuous argument, because, you know, I worked for the American Red Cross for 6 years in disaster services. And I had a short stint as an emergency medical technician. I know how the fire department works. I know how the EMS works. They can get to where they need to go. And further, I would say if they're going to rely on 5G or, you know, this wireless technology for their directions in an emergency, when we may have, you know, maybe weather emergency and these communication services aren't working, maybe there was, you know, some breach of, you know, a terrorist attack or whatever, because these are all very vulnerable. Wireless communication is extremely vulnerable to these outages. And if our emergency services were relying on that to get to where they need to go, we're in a big trouble. So I say that to say they don't rely on wireless communication solely for their directions, because that would be very insufficient. So they know how to get to where they need to go. I think that's a very disingenuous argument, because they use, you know, sophisticated services and technologies for, you know, their emergency service needs. And medicine just does not need 5G service.
They're
to
not going to rely
enhance-
upon this. They're hardwired.
Exactly.
They've been hardwired forever. Which
Absolutely.
brings up another argument that I've seen is that it's so ridiculous to me. Just in the they're running fiber optics down these streets, then up the pole, and then spraying it out. When all you got to do is take another 100 feet of fiber optics to the home. And not only that, but in Boise City, we've already got cable. And these 5G towers are much slower than cable.
Yes, the last map I looked at, pretty much the entire Treasure Valley was covered with service by CenturyLink and by Sparklight via phone connection or a cable connection. And now there's fiber optics. We have numerous ways to stay connected. And all of these wired services are much more reliable, much more secure, much faster. I mean, they meet all of the needs for what the industry is claiming we need these wireless services for. We are much better to do this wired for all of those reasons.
Right. One other question, and I've heard this from people that live out in Tetonia, Idaho, and you know, way out in the Tule, so to speak, out in the country, and they're convinced that they got to have 5G in order for them to get broadband data. Can you address that?
Well, so you know, it is a little bit of a challenge for people living off the grid or away from denser populations. But most people have satellite service, and actually there's satellites going up constantly to meet this need. And there are wired services too. People have phone lines, so there's other ways to do it. It's just, we don't need to do it wirelessly. It's just a much more inefficient way to bring this technology to people. So yes, we can do wires, and there's satellite too.
And Verizon's not going to put towers every 300, 500 feet, which they need to do to make this work, all the way out, you know, Weiser to Cambridge, Idaho. They're not going to put that up and down the highway and out across all the roads to all the different homes. That's just never going to happen.
Well, that's a great point. So in the areas that are at a much bigger distance from dense population, from the cities, it doesn't make sense. That infrastructure of 5G does not make sense at all.
Well, not only that, but the intention originally was to have, just like they did in the 1936 Act, is that was for telephone, that we paid a fee so that telephone went everywhere, which you know, telephone's everywhere, right? The old wired cables are everywhere for the regular landline phones, and that was supposed to be the same thing for this. And we've been paying on our cell phone bills, and that money's been, I don't know what's happened to that money, but potentially we are supposed to have this all wired to our homes anyway, but somehow that money has disappeared somehow.
Well, yeah, what we think happened is that the industry took it and put it into, they took that money that we paid for fiber optics and for wired services, and they put it into trying to figure out 5G essentially,
Right.
And wireless technologies. So ethical dilemma aside, yeah.
All right, well, we're definitely over time today, so wrap it up. So basically, at the end of the day, the conclusion is, and the confusion has been in the industry, is that Title II is for telecommunications, cell phone coverage, making a phone call, send a text message, Title I is for broadband data. That's getting your Netflix, that's getting your Amazon, that's getting all that stuff. That high-speed internet access, and that can be properly regulated by the governments. Without a doubt, the governments need to look at the code a little closer and understand that they have the ability to properly regulate that and protect. We didn't even go into private property rights, but that's a whole nother issue we can go into, because basically these things have been pointed out. They can become basically great tracking tools and violate our Fourth Amendment rights. That's another issue as well. There's no reason to decimate the character of our neighborhoods with the aesthetics of these ugly towers every 300, 500 feet, when we've already got plenty of cable throughout our valley, and we've got the ability to make cell phone calls, and we need to have the government step up and get independent agencies, in other words, hire and make the industry pay for it, not have the industry do it, but get independent people to do a proper drive test, a proper propagation study, not just a map, but a real study with specifications. What's the specifications in the tower? What's the specifications that is coming out, that will be coming out of that tower? And is it going to reach our phones? And that is where we'll have the proof, just like the other engineers do for electricity, the plumbers do it, the HVAC guys do it, the roof guys do it, all that stuff. So anyway, guys, so if you want to take action on this, first of all, join idahoansforsafetechnology.org. Just go to that website. We'll put up a list there. You need to go onto the Meridian, Eagle, Kuna, Star, and Boise and contact. It's real simple. You can contact your council people and tell them you don't want broadband data. You don't want these small wireless telecommunications facilities in your neighborhoods. There's no need for it whatsoever. So it's up to you to take that action and raise the awareness for these council people to step up and do their jobs properly. Cathy, any closing comments? If they want to get a hold of you, if they want to have their home measured for electromagnetic frequency radiation, for their Wi-Fi and other devices, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, sure. So my website is wholehomeandbodyhealth.com. And yes, I bring my professional grade meters to your home. I measure everything that you're getting exposed to, and I give you steps to reduce your exposure. Very, very easy to do.
And guys, it's really important to understand that, because as we know, this 5G stuff puts out 25 million times more radiated power than what's needed to make a cell phone call, and it goes completely through a baby's brain. And I've got a brand new grandson, and I don't want to see him have his brains radiated. And they just put a tower. Cathy, did you know they put a tower on Centennial High School?
Well, most schools have them around here. I don't get it.
Oh my gosh, it's just I mean, there's gonna be a lot of problems, guys. Anyway,
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
you guys need to be a 5-minute activist. Take that activity. I'm David DeHaas from Living Waters Wellness Center on the Whole Body Detox Show. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week with another show. Have a blessed week.